World War I, it really didn't go well for Russia. With some 2.2 million dead, nearly 4 million wounded, and a comparable number either captured or missing by 1918, it was deeply unpopular and in part contributed to the October Revolution, during which Bolshevik forces led by Vladimir Lenin seized power. The newly established Soviet government quickly set about negotiating a peace treaty with the Central Powers, ceding a tremendous amount of Russian territory, but in process, securing their country's exit from the war. And while some hoped that peace would follow, this instead marked the opening of a new front, the Russian Civil War, pitting Reds against Whites and Greens against pretty much everyone else in a battle royale to determine Russia's political future. It also seemed like a great moment to push for independence, for some at least, and that's exactly what happened in the far-off remote territory of Siberia. The Whites represented something of an umbrella movement for anti-Bolshevik forces in Russia. This ranged from democratic socialists and Republicans on the left to monarchists and ultra-nationalist groups on the right. Pretty much the only thing they all agreed on was that Lenin was bad and had to go. But after a push into Moscow failed, the majority of their operations were limited to a, new Eastern Front in Siberia. It was here that a provisional government for an autonomous Siberia was established in Tomsk. With considerable help from allied multinational forces, notably the Czechoslovak Legion and Japan, then participating in a broad military intervention with a not-so-covert goal of overthrowing the Soviet regime, the White Army succeeded in defeating local Bolsheviks. However, instead of consolidating power, this led to more divisions with a new, rival provisional government establishing itself. The only problem was the original provisional government was, still here. Neither government recognized the other, and both claimed to be in charge of all of Siberia. But before we got a civil war within a civil war, they dissolved themselves in wake of the formation of the provisional all-Russian government centered in Omsk. It was overthrown just a few months later, though, and it was from the seemingly endless political chaos emerged the first all-Ukrainian Far Eastern Congress, which sought a new Ukrainian state in the Russian Far East, Green Ukraine. That might seem completely random at first, but there was actually a sizable Ukrainian population in the region. By 1897, Ukrainians made up roughly 15% of the population in Primorskaya Oblast, which covered the lands west of Sakhalin to Vladivostok in the south. In order to solidify its territorial claims out east, the Russian government offered free transportation and land to settlers, which included Ukraine, then part of the Russian Empire. And with the establishment of a railroad link in 1901, over 14,000 settlers were moving into the area per year. However, back west, a strong wave of nationalism was taking hold in Kiev and beyond. This only intensified after the Ukrainian People's Republic declared its independence from the Russian Soviet Republic in 1918. Back in the east, Ukrainians organized a Far Eastern Land Council, which led to a second all-Ukrainian Congress that proclaimed Green Ukraine part of the Ukrainian state, despite no geographic connection. A few months later, this plan was entirely scrapped, though, for a fully independent Green Ukraine. That summer, nearly 5,000 men enlisted in the self-proclaimed country's armed forces, and Yuri Halushko-Mova, a former steamboat engineer and World War I veteran, was chosen as secretariat. Now, the Ukrainians were not alone in creating new countries during this period. Pretty much everyone else seemed to jump on the bandwagon as well. The short-lived Trans-Caucasian Democratic Federative Republic popped up for a month before Georgia declared independence, followed shortly by Azerbaijan and Armenia. Even supporters of the October Revolution gave it a shot, with local authorities establishing the nominally independent Far Eastern Republic in 1920. Now, the Republic is a bit complex, since there was a genuine desire on the part of some to form a wholly independent state. Notably, this guy, who personally appealed to Lenin for its creation and later served as the Republic's first head of state. Many of those in positions of power, though, including Alexander, were cooperative with the Soviet government back in Moscow, eventually getting a nod from Lenin to go ahead with establishing the Republic, primarily to serve as a buffer state between Russia and territories then occupied by Japan. On that matter, Tokyo had approximately 70,000 troops in the area. When coupled with 12,000 Americans and other multinational forces, it was an issue that Soviet leadership figured it simply didn't need escalating, all the more so when the whites remained a threat elsewhere.
Our American Expeditionary Force was part of a combined military representation. The Supreme Allied War Council, fearing the results of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, directed military forces to northern Russia as well as Siberia. In this latter operation, Japan had agreed to a United States proposal that she join this multinational expedition. General Kikuzo Otani of the Imperial Japanese Army was the senior Allied officer present and was given command by the Supreme Allied War Council. The American Expeditionary Force, however, remained autonomous under the command of General Graves. Even so, much of the military activity in the Siberian sector required careful coordination and mixed representation.
So, despite a push by some to act, Lenin took a more pragmatic approach, allowing the nominally independent but cooperative Far Eastern Republic to exist, at least for the time being. The territory of the Republic overlapped and actually exceeded that of Green Ukraine, including lands further west such as those around Chita and the northern half of Sakhalin Island. In reality, however, the government exercised little control outside modern-day Ulan-Ude until the summer of 1920, when the Amur territory decided to integrate. Nevertheless, it still had to cooperate with regional White Army forces. That same year, though, the Americans withdrew from Siberia, leaving just the Japanese. Bolshevik forces were also continuing an advance from the Urals. Japan, sensing a shift in the balance of power, ultimately decided to recognize the Far Eastern Republic in a treaty it concluded with the Red Army. Tokyo then began to withdraw its forces. No longer with foreign backing, the Whites were dealt a series of defeats, having to abandon Chita in October, which the Republic declared as its new capital. Then, in Vladivostok, a provisional assembly of the Far Eastern Republic met, which set January 1921 as the date for national constituent elections. It also approved a new constitution modeled after that of the United States. In response, conservative forces within the White Army staged a coup with Japanese support, establishing yet another provisional government which came to control a sizable portion of the Pacific coast. This was the last holdout of white forces in the Russian Far East, and it ultimately fell to advancing Red Army forces, thinly disguised as the Far Eastern Republic's own, shortly after Japan announced it would fully withdraw from Siberia by October 1922. This effectively marked an end to the Russian Civil War, and therefore the need for a buffer state. The Far Eastern Republic was dissolved that November, its authority transferred to Moscow. Alexander, whose quasi-democratic leadership style had resulted in him being removed from office the previous year, was arrested in 1924, expelled from the Communist Party, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He later was released for health reasons in 1925, only to be arrested again under Stalin's rule and executed for espionage in 1937. The upstart country of Green Ukraine was soon dissolved as well, and its leadership arrested for so-called anti-Soviet activities. Lishkamova, however, who served a 5-year prison sentence in Chita, did manage to return to Ukraine, where he later died in Kiev in 1942. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to this episode of Ghost Countries. What happened in the Russian Far East is a very interesting, though overlooked chapter of the broader Civil War, and it really does make you think, what would have happened if Green Ukraine or the Far Eastern Republic had been able to secure their independence? How would that have changed not just regional, but world history? I'm thinking in context of World War II, or the post-war rivalry between the United States and Soviet Union. Now, admittedly, any country there would be under Russian sway. That's almost a given. I think it would be a similar situation to what you saw in much of Eastern Europe. However, still, just its very being would have altered geopolitical relations in the area. And when you look at modern circumstances and issues such as the ongoing territorial dispute between Russia and Japan over some of the various islands in the region, or the Korean War, relations with China, even Mongolia, it is a very interesting alternative timeline, I guess you could say, to think about what could have happened if there was some type of independent, or at least quasi-independent, country in that region. Anyway, thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it, and see you guys next time.